dias. This is a very special day for this country and education, and therefore it's a very special day for me. The conditions for what we call whole system change that benefits all children and all students and society are beginning to become favorable here. And so I feel that this is a takeoff moment for the country. But there's much to be done, and it's quite, even though the forces are strong and they're converging, there's also a difficulty of implementation of the good ideas. And what I've done for today, and I will have shared the PowerPoint presentation so that you can, in Spanish, so you can access it afterwards. And but what I have approached this way, I'm based in Canada, in Toronto, and for the last 11 years, we took a system in Ontario, the biggest province in Canada, 13 million people, and it was a stagnant system with a fair amount of conflict in 2002 when we started. And we began with, I was advisor to the Premier, Dalton McGuinty, and I'm going to distill the lessons we learned, but basically we started into a very rapid strategy. We knew it was long-term, 10 years or more, but we wanted results within the short term, 2 years. And then we did get those results. And so we were able to apply some ideas we've learned from research more generally, but basically we created our own pathway. And it's a pathway that is not so complex. It can be done. In other words, it can be described, which I will do. So what I've tried to do is take our own lessons from Ontario in the last 11 years, and also the lessons from other countries, because at the same time we're very much involved with OECD, with PISA, and with Andreas Schleicher, who heads PISA, on looking behind the PISA numbers, I would express it. What are the policies that are being followed? What are the strategies? What can we learn from these successes in different countries? So we're always analyzing and looking at refining the strategies for effectiveness. I also, since finishing, and I still work with the new Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, so we continue to go further than we did, but I also have formed a group of about 10 of us, and we mix and match on projects around the world we don't do, this is going to sound a little bit strange, but we don't do research anymore. We always team up with a country or a province or a state, and we do implementation. And we apply research, obviously, but we are pulling out from the details, so it's very practical, day-to-day problem solving on how to improve systems. We're currently, for example, working in California, very big system, 36 million people, 1,009 districts, very poor performance for the last 30 years, and now the governor, the state superintendent, the districts, there are 1,009 districts, ourselves and others are working to really develop, and we've been doing this for about 8 months, and it's going to be the next 6 or 7 years for sure, develop success in California. One of the few states, actually, in the US that will demonstrate that you can make performance by combining the right forces. We work in Australia quite a lot, in the Netherlands, I won't go to list the countries, Uruguay, we've been involved in, and so also more broadly in Latin America, there is a movement for educational reform that surfaced in the last 2 years that's going to get stronger and stronger. I have a team of, as I said, maybe about 10 people. A couple of us are at the policy strategy level. Andy Hargraves, who's based at Boston, and myself working as a team to formulate the best ideas we can. We have people that we call capacity building. These are people who are strong on pedagogy. They are curriculum instruction, training and development, something about implementation that I want to stress in relation to the report that you developed. So we've got strong capacity building, both designers and trainers who can carry this out and develop leadership in others. And then we've got a couple of researchers who are very much strongly based in the improvement system, including a recent graduate from Harvard, Santiago Rincon Gallardo, who is from Mexico but now lives in Toronto and works with me full time. So we have a we're very much immersed, I think, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to come to Colombia, because it looks like something is going to happen. And the combination of the business sector, the political sector, and the educational sector can be very powerful if we do the right things. So what I've done in the PowerPoint that I'll turn to in a few moments is I do want to convey, as I was asked to do, the lessons from Ontario, looking more closely than anyone can because I was on the inside. But also, at the same time, I have in mind what your report says and what your development is about to be. And I furthermore have in mind what's happening around the world, because there are a number of issues that are coming together. They are clear, but they also can be interpreted superficially. And this is the biggest danger, that you take an idea like teacher excellence and you interpret it in the right direction, but superficially. So let me see on this reform. We'll get the picture up here. Okay, I'm going to speak to these slides in English, but you'll see them in Spanish. And let's see. There are a couple of problems I want to say about the question I started with is, why does system reform often fail? Why does it fail when it looks like the right strategies are being considered and people try to bring about reform, but they end up failing? And so I want to use these to frame some of the things I'm going to say later. So there are two reasons why they fail, I think, if you stand back from this. One is that some of the important ingredients are missing in the strategy. And I said before, we think of only a small number of ingredients, about 6. And I'll list those in a moment. So one problem is you've got some good ideas, but they're not complete. They're incomplete. Another problem is that there's a failure to have an implementation plan that's strong and well led. This is the biggest problem, actually. And if you look at the report that was developed for this conference, it's a very strong report, and I endorse the ideas in it, but I'm going to say it's incomplete in a couple of ways. One is that there's no implementation plan yet, and that's a good thing, because the implementation plan should be formulated by the relevant parties, and I would interpret this day to be a signal that the implementation plan is what is needed next. Figuring out how to do it. This is the biggest problem. How do you actually do it, even if it sounds good? Also related to implementation that I want to emphasize is that it has to be well led with strong leadership. In our own case, the premier of the province, Dalton McGuinty, committed for the first time in Ontario to having education as a priority when he was elected in 2003, and he stayed with that commitment as one of the top 3 priorities for the next 10 years. So you need at the very top, if you like, a strong commitment to not only the education reform, but to the implementation process. So I formulated here 6 things that I think are, I'll say, essential in combination, and they are, Pedro used the word systemic. These are systemic points. That is, they feed on each other. And if you're missing 2 of them, it won't work. And so this is my distillation of what we've learned about the key factors, and I think it's consistent with what I see at OECD countries that are having success. So one, fairly obvious in some ways, but not to be underestimated, very high expectations attached to a small number of ambitious goals. And we hear in the report the high expectations. We heard this morning in the introduction of these ideas, the expectations that are essential for this next stage. So clear, high expectations, one thing. Second, and this is the most important after the first one, is a focus on what we call capacity building. Capacity building is a term that's, to us, straightforward in some ways. It's about the competencies and skills of people who are doing implementation. So it's the competencies and skills of teachers, it's the competencies and skills of school leaders, principals, and it's one point I want to stress when we get to, you'll see this become more clear in a moment, is that we've also worked very hard on the competencies of the group, not the competencies of individuals only, but the quality of the group. The group being the teachers in a given school, the group being a network of schools or a region or a province, the group being included in the Ministry of Education. What's the collective competency and capacity, not just the individual one? Number three, very important, good data on how well students are doing in relation to our key goals, which were literacy, mathematics, high school success. What do the data say? We want the data in order to understand what we have to do to improve things. It's not just about accountability, it's about strategy. So what do the data say? Number four, transparency of data. That means openness, that people can access it easily, people can understand it. And I just want to say about transparency, if you have transparency without some of the other conditions, you get problems. Transparency by itself causes problems. If you combine it with the actions that are embedded in these 6 points, you get more development. And then the fifth one, second last one, a growth-oriented accountability. I don't know how quite to say this so that it explains across cultures, but when it comes to accountability, there's been a tension. And we've solved the tension, I think. The tension is, if you want results, you want to get very strong about intervention. We should do this and involve it. So you build up policies that are stronger. We call it negative accountability, because in the United States is the worst example, I have to say, where the high stakes accountability become a problem rather than an advantage, because everyone worries about the results. And what do you get? You actually get cheating. If you look at Atlanta, the state superintendent was indicted for making the results look better than they actually were. Philadelphia last week, indicted, same problem. So you get in this negative accountability. And what we've been able to do is say, yes, we want accountability, but we want it primarily for development, not for judgment. I mean, there's judgment built into the combination of these 6 factors, but we want it primarily for judgment, for growth and development. So this is a very important part of this one. And the last one, strong leadership at different levels. This is the levels of being able to, this is all levels. We in our strategy, you'll see it in a moment, we built up new capacity at the Ministry of Education. We built up new capacity at the regional level, the districts in our case. We had 72 districts. And we built up capacity at the school level, principals and teachers. So let me take you through then some of these ideas. I know we have the rest of the morning, the panel. I'll be on also later at the end of towards the end of the day in some exchange. And I very much am interested in not only the reaction to these ideas today, but hopefully after today, what might happen next in this country to move forward. I want to start with this professional capital book that Andy Hargraves and I did last year. And it's just been translated into Spanish. It's coming out next month in March. The publisher is a Spanish publisher. Morata is the name of the publisher. And in the book, Professional Capital, and this is a very good concept for us, you can see it consists of 3 pieces: human, social, and decisional. And I'm going to say there's a tendency when we think of improving teachers to think mainly of human capital. And I'm going to say human capital is necessary but not sufficient to get implementation effectiveness. And so human capital is the quality of the individual. And I want to say, and this is in a sense my reaction to your report, I'm going to say the report has very strong things on human capital, but almost nothing on social capital. What is social capital? Social capital is the quality of the group. And there's so much research, and we've developed this in practice. When you develop a collaborative culture among teachers within a school or across a network of schools, well led by school principals and others, you always get better results. And it's obvious when you think of it this way, the group has more power than the individual. So the individual human capital can come into the system, and the culture eats them up as they come in if you're not changing the culture at the same time. So I'm saying to you, a culture of a collaboration is essential. And it's in the book and in the subsequent work we've done in leadership has been very much to develop that further. Decisional capital is the quality of the decisions that people make about improving education. Malcolm Gladwell made famous a couple of years ago the 10,000-hour rule, where he said, it is based in research actually, that if you want to become expert at something, you have to put in at least 10,000 hours of skill development and reflective practice. And so that this is another reason why we want the culture of the school to be a learning culture, a collaborative learning culture, because if, so you mentioned a beginning teacher, beginning principal, they come in as a rookie. If they're in a learning culture, they learn year after year. And within 10 years, you have a lot of not only individual learning, but collective learning. So the strategy has to involve collective learning. I'll come back later also to the question of leadership. And there's another missing component, I'll say, of the report. And I'm not being critical when I say this, because the report centered very smartly on teacher quality. But another missing component that's crucial to the teacher quality accomplishment is the quality of school leadership. The quality of school leadership, they say in the research, it's the second most important factor in the lives of students. The teacher is the most important factor. The second most is the school principal and system principal. And we have been doing a lot of strong work at teaming up school principals and collaborative cultures. So I want to just put this in perspective. When we come to Ontario, that's a picture of Canada. This is a very nice non-stop 6-hour flight from Toronto to Bogota, so that's good. Always good in my work to have a non-stop flight that's that is not so long. And if we look at what happened, 2003 was when we began our reform. And I'm going to be fairly quick because you can look at these slides later. There was a lot of conflict. Teachers were on strike to the government. That there was a mediocre performance, I think I want to call it. A lot of just not a terribly bad system, but a system going nowhere. Just as also to punctuate a remark, we had, I forget the number, but we had in the previous 4 years to 2003, we had maybe 9,000 days of strikes, teacher strikes. Over a longer period than that. We have not had a single teacher strike in the last 11 years. Zero. Not one day gone from it. By 2006, we had a movement going with some reduction in conflict. We also showed results. And I want to say it this way. This is a dilemma, not a dilemma, but a challenge for us. When you want to reform like you're doing, you need to stay with it for 10 years or more, but you also want to get results sooner than that. So we think of some of the strategies. This is perhaps a phrase that doesn't, well, it probably does equate. We think of some of the strategies as slow boats. What does a slow boat mean? It takes a while to get home. And so in the first, if you think of the 5 axes in your report, axes 1, 2, and 5 are slow boats. 1 is improve pre-service. Number 2 is attract new people to the profession. And number 5 is remuneration. You want to do those 3 things, but they are slow boats. What we want are faster boats at the same time. And we want to see results as measured by progress of student learning and closer reduction of gaps. We want to see results within 2 years and then keep going. And we have seen mostly after 2 years, 3, 4, 5, now 11, with some exceptions in some given years, because it's not just linear, because you have to figure out new things, but definitely a movement forward. And so by the time we got to 2010, we had substantial improvement in our core results, which I'll refer to in a moment. And one could call it a success. Now that we look at 2014, we're going into a new phase. We have not done as well in mathematics, so we're working big focus on mathematics. We've introduced new programs in early learning, where the minister referred to this. Early learning, 0 to age 5, but in our case, we have, for example, created full-day kindergarten for all children who are 4 and 5 years of age, integrated with daycare, 100% full day. And there are 250,000 children of that age, and we put in 25% each year. The last 25%, September 2014, will be involved. We've already seen that those students who came for the 2 years are doing better in grade 1, academically and socially, emotionally, than their counterparts who haven't had that experience. So that's the quick history. There's a good picture of Ontario, lots of lakes, and just an hour north of Toronto. A lot of big territory. Most of the population is in near the border of the U.S. Toronto has a population of about 6 million out of the 13 million. So Ontario, I've said 13 million, 2 million students altogether, 4,000 primary schools, 900 secondary schools, 72 districts. There are 4 systems. There's a bit of a historical reason for that. We have some Francophone districts, French-speaking districts. We have some Catholic districts that are fully funded and some that, but the whole system is a public system, and it's governed by the Ministry of Education. 100% of the finance comes from the state, from Ontario, no local funding. So a little bit of an anomaly here when you think of Canada. We have no federal agency involved in education. So every province is autonomous. And so you think of Ontario as a country, I think I want to say. We work a lot in Alberta, the second largest population. So the provinces tend to be similar in the themes, but in terms of governance, they're independent from each other. But on the other, when we work in Australia, it's similar to here, federal and state. And here, I think the proposition is how can the regions and the central government develop a partnership that accomplishes what we're talking about today. So when we look at the unions, there are unions, of course, that are separated. They're fairly strong, and we have made some strong developments. So let's take a little bit of development. In that last point, 95% of our students are in the public system. Our private school system is very small, and it's partly because we wanted to develop a system where the parents wanted to send their children to the public system. They could to the private system, but they have to pay money, and they're quite satisfied with the public system. So if you look at examples of what we've accomplished, we have an assessment agency in Ontario called Education Quality and Accountability Office. It's an agency that begins to develop, they do assessments of reading, writing, math, literacy at the high school level, graduation rates. They do a small number of assessments that are very well founded, and we have 4 levels of proficiency. Level 1 and 2 is not proficient. Level 3 and 4 is highly proficient, actually, and we have gone from 54% to 70% in these years. Doesn't mean that 70% is just proficient. Almost everyone can read. 98% can read, but this is a higher level of measurement or standard. High school graduation, very strong success. 68% we started with. It's been going up 2% a year. Every year it's currently 83%. It'll soon go to at least 90, I think. Very strong success because of the changes we've made, implementing the experiences of teachers and students in high schools, and that we begin to diminish also the number of students and the number of schools that are low performing. We have what's called an OFIP, an Ontario Focused Intervention Partnership, where we help schools that are not doing so well get better without judgment of the principles of transparency, of capacity building. And those schools, which used to, when we started of the elementary level, the primary level, there were about 700 in the sample of low school performance that were stagnant, and now there are 69 schools. Because of the intervention, the number of schools that are doing poorly will almost disappear. And then 95% of the students, I said, can read well. That's really the whole system is pretty strong. And then finally, there's been a big reduction in the attrition of teachers. Before we started, teachers would come in as new teachers. And by the time it got to year 3 of their big career, maybe 25% of them would have left. And now that number plummeted to it's about 7%. Why is that the case? Because if teachers come into a system that's good, they want to stay there. They stay there because they're working, they're getting something done, they're accomplishing things and developments. So in terms of the strategies that we used, we had 3 priorities to start with. That didn't mean we didn't have other priorities, but these were 3 at the top. Improve literacy, improve mathematics, and improve high school graduation. So those were the 3. When we say improve, we mean raise the bar and close the gap. That means everybody goes up, but the gap between high and low gets reduced. That's our measure of it. That's what we do. We had the 4th priority, incidentally, that we've added since that beginning is early learning, preschool, earlier than age 5. So maintain a focus. This is very, how do you, it's easy to have an exciting day like today. People, they celebrate, they say this is great, and then the reality starts tomorrow, and you go back to the normal thing, and you lose the momentum. The big momentum today, how do you keep the momentum going? We have a very strong emphasis on, and this is why leadership and implementation is important, on how do you maintain the focus, the relentless focus on this agenda for, I'm going to say, the next 10 years, but starting today, tomorrow. And then we'd say owned by the ministry, and this depends where you're starting. In this case, the ownership of the strategy at the beginning was within the government. The Premier, myself as advisor, the Minister of Education, the Ministry of Education. And so our own strategy there was, we think we know what is needed, we think we know what the sector wants, but it's going to require some heavy emphasis. And so the way I describe it is top-down assertiveness with partnership with the sector. That happened to be our case. In California, where we're working, the state is doesn't have much capacity. So there we say, how do we build up relationships? We call it leadership through the middle, but this is the district level and how to build the regions within the state of California. So there are different starting points, but in our own case, it was definitely the initiative came from the center, and this is very important. When we look at the OECD results, for example, it's always the case, they say, it never can be successful if it just stays at the center, but equally so, it can never be successful if it's just bottom up. It doesn't add up. So you have to have a strategy that combines the top and the bottom, develops the partnership and the momentum to develop from there. So the political education of this is very important in terms of looking at evidence, a lot of dialogue. This is a process. Again, it's something that Pedro said at the beginning. He said, yes, this is a report today, this is a launch, but it's also a process that's beginning, and that the process has to really develop the change. A lot of consultation, a lot of interaction with the media, and a lot of feedback. During implementation, this is when things stand or fall. And implementation has to build capacity, but it also has to solve problems. And this is why you need two-way communication. This is why you need leaders who lead it. And this is why the rapport is very important in terms of this implementation. In terms of other aspects of this, we built capacity in the system, a lot of development leadership. This is, again, a flag I want to raise. If I just take the 5 axes, remember in the report that you heard on the video, and we heard about, I mentioned as 1, 2, and 5 were slow boats. They're structural, they're building up the human capacity. Number 3 and 4, number 3 is appraisal back to teachers, and number 4 is in-service in the report. And here in these two, I want to highlight those because it's easy to get them wrong. You can have appraisal systems that don't have an impact on learning. You can have in-service work, professional development, that doesn't actually change practices in the classroom. It's in this domain of appraisal and in-service where capacity building resides. And I'm going to say that the biggest issue for you is not going to be to operationalize 1, 2, and 5. It's going to be how to operationalize axes 3 and 4. 3 and 4 are at the heart of implementation. And so we're going to see how that really works. So thinking about implementation, high school graduation, I won't say so much about this. You can look at it in detail. I think more of the interest initially normally is at the primary level, but we have very precise success because of our 68 to 83%. So I leave that for the moment. I don't want to dwell on it, but we've written about it. There's some very good books. One of our co-leaders, whose name is Avis Glaze, G-L-A-Z-E, Glaze. She wrote a book with a couple of her colleagues that just came out that describes our strategy comprehensively with the data. So it's available in English, that book, but it's a very good account, which includes especially what systems we use to improve high school graduation, and then how we got developed in moving in this forward. So at the high school level, we were weakest on changing capacity. We changed a lot of other things. We were stronger at changing capacity of teachers at the elementary level. So more stuff on implementation. We developed people as the leadership. We developed systems and processes around data. These are details that you can look at later. So a whole set of things. And they're not, remember at the beginning I said there are 6 big things. I mean, we can change the language here and there, but you don't want to have a list of 22 critical factors because people can't remember them, you can't implement them. You do want a list of a small number of powerful factors that when they converge, they get big results. I want to talk about money a little bit. Certainly as you plan, and I really appreciate in the report, that there's a realistic but ambitious objective of getting more resources into the system, more money. And here, and I'd invite you to look at it more closely, OECD has, in their PISA results, has examined the role of money. And they've concluded that it's not the amount of money that makes the difference, it's how it is spent. So you can find systems that spend a lot of money. The United States spends the most money of anybody per pupil, and they get some of the poorest results. So what you have to figure out, and this is why I was talking that way about the 5 axes, that 1, 2, and 5, they require a certain amount of money, and that's good money, the slow boat money, but it's still good, it gets results. But 3 and 4 also require money, but how you spend it means whether it's wasted with low yield or it gets big results. And this is the detail, I hope after today, myself and some of my colleagues are really glad to talk about this. So we invested in people's leadership. We really thought that government people at the beginning, and I certainly say this about our own Ministry of Education, in 2003 and 2004, they did not have a lot of credibility with the schools. We had to build that new credibility on the part of the Ministry of Education as a partner. People at the policy level, this is many of, I guess I'll say ministers and other people at the political level, often underestimate implementation. They think by pulling a few levers you can get the results. Some of those levers are necessary, but additional implementation expertise is that. And frontline people, we say, often don't understand the politics. The world that they're in is a different world. And so what we have to do then is make the journey so that the success is felt and experienced at each of, I'm going to say, 3 levels. The level of schools and communities, 1 level, the level of regions, and the level of the country as a whole. So this has been a very important part of what we're doing. I just want to give this list because in terms of the total amount of time, I still want to say, and I don't know your Ministry of Education, I don't know the functions, so I just have this as an input. We invested for the first 3 or 4 years especially to change the culture of the Ministry of Education. That's what we did. And here's some of the things that we did in this. I'm not going to speak to them, but I'm going to let you digest them. But we changed the culture of the ministry in two ways. One is inside the ministry, and this is typical of many organizations, there were a lot of silos. So we had a leadership, a finance, a curriculum, and a couple of others. So you had silos inside the ministry. Therefore, there was little coordination and little common sense of strategy. We spent a lot of time on changing the culture of the ministry in two ways. One, and we required some new leadership to do this at the level of our case, the deputy minister. The charge of the leader of the ministry, the deputy in this case, was to build a collaborative culture within the ministry. That's internal to the ministry. And then secondly, to build new relationships with the sector, that is with schools and districts and regions, so that there was a greater two-way sense of partnership. This is very important because normally, if you're leading but you're not modeling what you're leading, you don't have much credibility with people who are doing implementation. So we ourselves then did change the Ministry of Education culture. It made a big difference. That the job is more enjoyable, I would say, but it's also more influential in developing some of the parts of this. So I leave that for you to think about whether this is important or not. Here are some of the systems and processes we put into place. This is relentless work. That's the best English word I can think of. Relentless focus on the core agenda of improving the teaching profession through Axes 1, 2, and 5, and improving the quality of implementation through redefining, I'm going to say, Axes 3 and 4, and using your language. Labor unions are always different in every country. I know you have strong union tradition. We worked very hard at figuring out, and it was hard to figure out, how to get a partnership with union involvement and that. And so each country has its own conditions for this. I leave this. This is an important issue. We were able to accomplish 2 4-year labor agreements there are 4 unions, 4 teacher unions in Ontario. And these 4-year agreements, so a total of 8 years, addressed the salary issue. They addressed all of the issues. We still had minor differences, but the structure, we actually called it the peace and stability strategy with the union. Peace and stability, so that we provide a framework to work together with this. A lot of emphasis on data. We had almost no data at the beginning, no good accessible data. I'll just take the high school. We now know where each and every student is in the progress, let's say, at the beginning of high school, which in our case is age 14 or so, grade 9 and grade 10, how well our individual students are doing, how do we help those students who are in danger of dropping out do something differently, the use of data to pinpoint problems, to take action on them, and to produce better results in doing this. There's a set of policies on teacher development that I'm just going to introduce. You can look at them later, but our policies, when it comes now to personnel, are the teacher and the leadership policies. These are 2 different sets of policies, but they're compatible. So this diagram is quite complicated, but when you get a chance to look at the PowerPoint, you can take it apart. We have strong policies to invest into teacher development, but here I want to make a distinction, and I hope it's understandable in what I've said before. You could have teacher development policies that govern the entry into the profession, the standards at the university or the teacher training institutions, the appraisal and standards for teachers. So that's one set. But you also need teacher development policies of how do teachers get better on their day-to-day work. How do they actually improve their learning, and what are those policies? And in that diagram, you have a set of those developments. But the part I want to emphasize in the few minutes that I have left is about the getting to some of this combination. You'll see in this diagram, there's a combination of teachers and leadership. And I just put this out. I've already mentioned it, but I want to say it again, that the leadership on the part of school leaders and other leaders is not mentioned in the report as far as I can see. I'm sure people, because I've already talked to them yesterday, have some ideas about that, but you have to integrate or couple teacher development strategies with leadership development strategies. Both are essential because the leaders can be very important for what is going to happen. We have an Ontario leadership framework, and basically what it does is to say what are the standards of good leaders, and we've done a lot of work on helping to develop leaders who in turn can develop other leaders. I'd like to close then with two comments. One is about what I think is going back to the essentials. If I had to think of the smallest number of things that need improvement in concert together, it's improvement in early learning. I know you have that on your agenda. Age 0 to 5, although in our case we have some things 0 to 3, but we concentrate on 4 and 5-year-olds because it was manageable. So early improvement in this. The second one, improvement in schooling. This is a part that it's discussed, but I want to highlight it as I get towards the closure here. The improvement of pedagogical practice is at the heart of capacity building. The widespread improvement of pedagogical practice. And this is not going to come from improving the 5 axes in a direct way. You actually have to say, how do we improve implementation? You improve it by the collaborative cultures. You improve it by leaders who can help lead it at the school level. You improve it by teachers learning from each other. All of this is the bread and butter of day-to-day implementation, and it's all focused on pedagogical practice. So that's the second one. Improve teachers, which is in your report. So notice I've made a distinction between improving schools and improving teachers. Improving schools is implementation. Improving teachers is improving their ability possibly to be good at implementation. But unless you have the second part, you don't do that. And finally, improving school leaders, very important. I'll close with this. I just did a book. This is the title of the book, The Principle, 3 Keys to Maximizing Impact. The 3 keys are lead learner, system player, and change agent. There are a lot of details. The same Spanish publisher is just about to publish this. It probably will take 2 months before it's out in Spanish. So just to close, I very much look forward to the rest of the day in the panel and discussion, but mostly I look forward to the next year and 10 years. But the next year, I think, is crucial. Does it get a solid start on the ground? Thank you again for inviting me.